Hey guys, welcome back to another video. It's been a long time since we've done a standard tier list, and I think honestly, it's a better time than ever. With set 6 basically coming out right now in English and set 7 already just releasing in Japan, I think we should combine two of them and make one giant like set 6, set 7 tier list. So before we go on, I'm going to say two things. The first thing is these are like mostly subjective. Like, obviously there's some objective picks here. Like, we all know that Levidros and Rezael are currently the two best decks. I think no one can argue that those decks are definitely S tier. Then we have the A tier, which I feel very confident about. Definitely, like, Night Rose is really good. Odium's kind of a gatekeep in the format. Aled Dilemma should be S tier if they get all their shit, but if they don't, it's really bad. And then there's Shiranui, which Shiranui does really well in this current format. So if you have any like issues with anything on this list, this is more of like a general idea of like the current format right now. In D tier and C tier, I didn't put too much thought into it. I just kind of like put this as like a baseline. But I'm only going to be going over decks that got supported in set 6 and set 7, along any new decks, of course. And secondly, be sure to, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what your personal takes on the format are. Alright, first up for set 6, we have Overlord. Overlord didn't get any direct support, but he did get Bellicosity Dragon, which is a new grade 2 encounter support that Energy Blast 3 and puts a card from your hand to soul to draw 2 cards. What's important about that is that you can put the OG Overlord into your soul, which is insane. Like basically getting Varga's Divine skill every single turn without any of the setup. So because of Bellicosity and how much the deck can high roll, I'm gonna probably put it like high B tier. Like maybe I'll put it in A tier, but B tier feels right. Like it just does, because like if it doesn't hit it, then obviously it's a pretty weak deck. And even with Bellicosity, the deck doesn't draw that many cards. Like it doesn't plus as much as like Varga can, or I guess break even as much as Varga can. Next up we have Koda Blaze. Koda Blaze is getting like technically 3 support cards, but only one of them is actually like viable. It's a new double rare that says it puts itself into soul when it's guarded with, and then when you soul blast, when you stand a rear guard in the same column as it, you can soul blast one and stand another rear guard in a similar column. So what's good about it is that because Koda Blaze, in order to get 5 attacks, it needs to soul blast 2 cards with the same name as rear guards on your board. So if you only have one, you basically just become like a really bad 4-attack deck. But with this new double rare, if you put a copy of himself into soul and you soul blast him, stand him, you can use his skill, soul blast another card to stand the rear guard in front of it. So that's what's really good about this support. But other than that, it's still Koda Blaze. It still doesn't solve the issue of like getting extra Koda Blaze into your soul, or even like anything else, like drawing more cards. Like it's getting a promo, it's really good. And what makes it really bad in English is that we still don't have Blazing Warcry, which is its first promo. So because of that, I think it draws a lot. So I'm going to put it in like the lowest of C tier. I still believe in this deck quite a bit. I think that's why I like it. I like the deck, and I think the deck is really good if it gets to its win condition. Next up is Tam Yuda. Tam Yuda did get a double rare that is really, really good. It's like on play, it's pretty much free. On play, you check top 7 for a Riri Me, Rara Me, and a stealth card, and you put that card into your hand. Then you you can EV3 and bind it to choose a Fox art in your drop zone and put it into your hand. So you can play like one-ofs of your Fox arts, whether it be like the Monster Reborn one or the Blitz order that minuses 10 your opponent. You can just play one of it and then use that order to bounce them back. But that's really all Tam Yuda got. But with that order, it's pretty good. You can search your promo that Superior rides into Tam Yuda, or you can even search Stealth PGs, since it doesn't specify non-Sentinel. So because of that, I'm going to put Tam Yuda. I mean, Tam Yuda has some really good early game. So I'm going to put Tam Yuda probably at like a low B tier. I think it's pretty darn good deck. Probably even higher than Archetype, to be honest, because Archetype has a much better turn 3, but this deck has far more consistent turns, and its scaling is much better than Archetype. Okay, next up we have the Gandiva. Gandiva got a masked unit, obviously, and the masked unit basically does the exact same thing as old Gandiva, except it has a few more extra effects. The removal effect's really good, since it not only gives you the crit without having to have 5 in your bind zone, but it also allows you to use Gandiva's skill. So you can use Gandiva's skill twice a turn, which that's pretty good. Obviously, it's like the OG, like, non-crest scaling deck. I think Gandiva can still have an insanely nasty turn 3. And with the mask decks, with this and Sto Raja being much more consistent, I would argue that like this probably goes in probably like B tier right here, like right next to Prison, because Prison can still wall out this deck, especially with the amount of soul that it uses now. But I'd say it's better than Al Calibra. And in terms of Shoujo, I think it could do pretty well against Shoujo, personally. Next up, we have Dragon Kaiser Vermilion. He got a new form, the Blood, in set 6. It's pretty good. I would argue it gets better once set 7 comes out and Vas Ruger becomes one of the best decks. Because currently, if we're talking about the set 6 format, 2 of the best decks like basically get rid of their boards or can get rid of their entire boards. So it becomes very hard for Vermilion to actually get those 2 hits off. Because some of their best cards, Spark Spike Dragon from DivineZ set 3, it actually gives your front row 10k power as long as you hit 2 or more things with your Vanguard, and also allows you to EB3 draw as long as you hit something with your Vanguard. So this becomes very hard to do if your Rezile or Levidra's opponent know what they're doing, or even like, I clearly forgot her name, Night Rose. Even if a Night Rose player knows what they're doing, because they can just hollow out their board and then pop it. But against other decks, like Shiranui, you can obviously bind their Restanders, which is really good. ODM, you can bind their Anachronist Dragons if they leave them on board, which is really, really good. So I think he gets better over time, and he's, you know, he does scale pretty well. Like, he has the Order that gives 5k, he has Spark Spike, which gives free 5ks, he has his skill, which just basically gives 5k to the front row and a crit. So Vermilion's actually pretty darn good. I'm kind of convincing myself. Definitely higher than Zorga, since Zorga also kind of has a bad time. I would argue that he probably goes in like, I would maybe even goes above Leonor, because if the Leonor player leaves their Rosariums on board, Vermilion can just eat those for breakfast, since Bind is really strong in Standard. Alright, next up we have set 7, which is Vas Ruger. So Vas Ruger, Akshaya is really, really good. This is probably one of the best decks in the format. I mean, it literally won JP Worlds as soon as set 7 came out. There was like barely any time for testing, and even with that limited time, everyone knew like how good this deck was. Like, if you ask what Vas Ruger does now, it does like everything. It gets extra drive, it gets extra crit, it draws a bunch of cards, it cycles through its deck, it has 4 to 5 attacks sometimes, and most of the time the 4th attack is enough. It has rear guards that have protection. Like, this deck does everything now, and it's honestly really, really insane how well they've upgraded this deck, and I feel confident enough to put it in the S tier right next to these 3. I don't know if she's personally better than any of these 3. She's definitely like right there. I would argue that all 3 of these decks are around the same level. Maybe Levidra's is a little better in English, because I think a lot of English players use Levidra's more, and a lot of GP players use a Rezile more. But she's right up there with the rest of the decks, and it's honestly really crazy how much better they made her. Moving into Dark States, I don't know why Bruce is here. Just put Bruce here. Alright, Jet. So Jet got a new Stride in set 6, Chronos Command. It also got a new double rare, which is pretty bad, but it's like a budget Ford and Revoltus. Chronos Command is okay. I think it gets much better against Vas Ruger, because if you have removal against Vylord that's really strong, especially against Vylord since it's an overdress unit, if you stride into Chronos Command, just bot deck Vas Ruger's entire board, it becomes really hard for Vas Ruger to recover from that. But currently, with Levidra's and Rezile being the best decks, I would argue that Jet is like, like Jet didn't really change. That's the whole thing. It's like Jet is no different than he was the previous set. He just has a little bit more of like an option to board wipe, which is cool, but I still think Jet is probably like a low B tier, probably a little bit like right here right next to Tam Yuda. Since Tam Yuda probably has a better early game, and a lot of these decks could just ride up and kill Jet if they have a good enough turn. Speaking of a deck that could just ride up and kill you, Chaos. Chaos got a double rare in... Oh, I should also mention, every glitter deck did get a upgrade in terms of the Fire Regulus, which is in this set. And obviously, the Fire Regulus is good in a lot of decks, but it's better in glitter, because if you find a glitter off the top 5, you can just add that card to your hand. So that's really good for these kind of decks, and obviously Chaos is one, so that's also a buff to Chaos. But Chaos also received a Blitz Order, which honestly isn't that great. It's pretty much just Walk the Dark, but it's free. And Walk the Dark is a good card, but it's only good in decks that are like Pale Moon, so like Harry or Lukier, which we'll talk about in a second, that have access to Togue. I don't know how to say her name, like Togue, the promo that can shove a grade 3 from deck or drop into soul. You can consistently loop Walk the Dark, while Chaos really can't do that with his order. It's like a really neat kind of 15k shield, but out of all of the orders that they got, Chaos has probably got one of the worst. But it's still like a similar kind of deck. It's like Barrow Magnus in a way, but a lot better, since it just rides up and kills you. In most cases, you will hit the high roll, but maybe it would go like in a high C tier. I'm not saying like they don't like Chaos. I'm not saying the Chaos can't win. Like all of the decks in C tier can win. It's just the problem is that if Chaos rides up and doesn't have like an insanely good turn 3, it does fold pretty hard to some of these decks up here. Next up is Lukier. Lukier got pretty good in set 6 because she really only got one card, which is Doreen the Thruster. And for those of you who don't know what Doreen does, I'm going to put her on screen right here. Basically just like a better Brainwash Swirler, because immediately on play she soul charges 1 and then puts a card from your drop into soul, which can be your promo that can put Walk the Dark or other grade 3s into your soul. But also she gets plus 3k power every time a card is put into your soul by a card effect. So that's really insane, because it's just better Brainwash Swirler. So Lukier can like call these cards, and then through all of its skills can get the Doreen the Thrusters up to like over 30, sometimes even over 40k power, which is really fucking crazy. And going first with that, that's a huge turn. So I would still argue that Lukier's still only 4 attacks, but with Doreen having an explosive turn 3, it might even be like B tier right now. I don't know where in B tier. That's kind of where this tier list is gonna like seem kind of weird to y'all, I imagine, is because I don't know exactly where these decks land in their specific tiers. But just know that I think Lukier is like a decent deck in this format, just because of how powerful Doreen is. Next up is Sacrifice Glass. So Glass had a really rough time. I thought it was going to be a lot better in set 3 format, but because of how good Shoujo ended up being in that format, Sacrifice really got screwed over, since Shoujo can obviously fuck with your bind zone. So you bind the Grand Dogmas, but then they just put them back into your deck or into your drop, and because of that, Sacrifice's whole like win con was very bad. It got a card that solves that issue, but now with Shoujo not being a meta deck anymore, it's a little, too little too late. But it still is a decent card, because like on play you CB1 and retire a rear guard, and considering the fact that Glass doesn't need to CB for like really anything besides Sweet Bait or Saccharine Bait, that's pretty good. But again, that's only one card. Like, it's not like it's enough to bring the deck up to meta relevance or anything, and they didn't even get like a promo. So because of that, Glass is like a decent deck that can get pretty big hands, but I would still argue it's like a C tier deck, like a C tier deck right here. I wouldn't even argue it's C tier, because like it does get big number, it does consistently retire, which is pretty good in standard, but especially in set 7, once Bob Sarger becomes like one of the best decks and those Vilords can't be retired, it's going to be very hard for Glass to get their energy up. Next up is another deck from set 7 that got a bit, or set 6 that got a big upgrade, and that's Favniel. Favniel got one card basically, which was the Favniel Rheingold. And I would argue that the build is okay, but the main thing that this deck struggles with is it gets no hand. This deck gets absolutely 0 hand. So if you don't like sack them with crits or like get them early, I guess, this deck doesn't do anything. And it's kind of just like a more consistent Favniel and has better scaling, but Favniel himself already was not good. So I would put him at like a C tier, like probably higher than something like, it can probably be like cross overdress in most cases, or maybe even like definitely beat Virgila. The thing is just it doesn't have a lot of the same like scaling that these decks have. It doesn't do anything super unfair since it's just a Vanguard Restander deck. But yeah, Rheingold's much better than OG Favniel, and there's a lot of ways to build Favniel. You can do like the Alma Jester build with Bifrons, or you can do the Pale Moon build with the promo that can instantly put the old Favniel into Soul. So there's a lot of variety in Favniel, but I don't think it's that strong. Next up is a set 7 deck, which is the upgraded Byko Stellar Alma Jester. Now this one's actually pretty good because it frees up a lot of deck space, because with Masks build, obviously you need to play 4 Masks, you need to play 3 of the old Unica, you had to play your like Mask of Hydrograms, probably 2 of them, and some lists play the Dragon Tree Wretch, which is even more space. This one, because you just play 4 copies of Byko Stellar, you just need to have that. There's so much more deck space. The only problem is, like, she's pretty slow to get a restand. If you go first, you're not going to get 4 attacks. All you're getting is 3 attacks. But you're getting 3 attacks with, like, extra power, a retire, a crit, a draw, or an extra drive, which is, like, pretty good. Like, I would argue it's not, like, a huge meta contender, but it's definitely, like, a B tier deck. And the fact that you can get consistent Persona Ride is something that I really value. Since if you don't get Persona Ride, you're really going to struggle. I would argue maybe these two are on the same level, because Varga can wipe their board, which does hurt Byko Stellar, but Byko Stellar can recover more than Varga and can actually always find its Persona as long as you just have 1 Bifrons. Next up, we're going to cover all of the Keter encounter decks right now, like right here, because they all got the same support, which is Coco, which is the generic. This one, Coco is actually pretty good. Like, she's basically Sages. As long as your opponent sees a trigger offensively or defensively, she gets plus 10k shield and plus 10k power. So she can become like a 23k booster or a 15k shield, as long as your opponent just sees a trigger, which that's already pretty good. But her first effect is when she's placed in a Ricket Circle, you put a card from your hand into Soul, you look at top 2, you put one of them into your hand, and you put the other on top or into your Soul. So she feels a lot of Soul. And the other thing is that for a lot of these decks, you do need specific cards in Soul. Majesty Lord, you need Blaster Blade, Blaster Dark. PBO, you need PBD. Minerva, you need a grade 3 Regalia, or just a grade 3 card in Soul. So that's also pretty good. Ezel, not really. You don't really need a lot of specific cards into Soul, or at least not yet. Set 9, give us that new... please give us that new Ezel in set 9. But it is nice because Ezel does burn through a lot of Soul. I know that from my teammate Steve, who plays the deck a lot. So I'm going to snap my fingers and put these guys in their correct spots, which will be... Yeah, so unfortunately, there's a few reasons why I put like this one. Like, PBO, I love the deck, but it just has not gotten any specific support in like over a year, so it hasn't really gotten anything. Majesty Lord would be higher if we actually had Blaster Blade the Vanguard, but we don't, and the more time we spend not having it, the more the actual format creeps ahead of it. So even when we do get Blaster Blade TV, it's not going to be enough to like carry the deck to like meta relevancy, in my opinion. Minerva is probably the best deck out of all of these. It actually was really good like a few years ago, but obviously the format's caught up with it. And then Ezel, it really struggles against a lot of these decks since it does ride up to grade 3 first, which would be a good thing if a lot of decks didn't have conditions like if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3. So you're basically making them go first with all the benefits of going second. So that hopefully that changes if Ezel ever gets like a new form. Next up we have Thea, who got an order card in this set, and Thea got it rough. Like, she got probably one of the worst orders besides Chaos. It's literally just like a worse Mythiarch Habitat. It's literally the same thing, check top 7, call 1, but it's name locked to Thea and it's a CB. And in a deck that both the Vanguards require a CB, that's really rude. And then playing an order in a deck that already wants to play set orders is pretty rough. And then in terms of just like everything the deck does, it's still the slowest out of all the Great Cross Epic decks, because realistically you want to save your Superior Rider promo until you can get Persona Ride twice. So yeah, it's still relatively in the same spot. I'm not gonna say it's D tier because it does have a really good Persona Ride turn, like much better than some other decks. So I would put it like a little bit ahead of Magnolia, or maybe even ahead of Virgilla. Probably Magnolia, since Virgilla can actually have a really nasty early game. But yeah, sorry Thea fans. Next up we have Amorta, which actually got a score on set 7. And it's not too bad. It's a Gabrielius and an Amorta Searcher. And that's really good, but it doesn't really solve a lot of the issues that Amorta actually has, which the fact that just it falls off super quickly and it doesn't actually give that much power. Like compared to a lot of the Destined ones or the Fated one decks, which scale pretty high, Amorta doesn't. Like as soon as Amorta hits its ceiling, that's it. It doesn't raise the ceiling anymore. So the new card does help, but again, it facilitates a combo where you realistically need to be at 4 damage, need to use like 3 CB in order to like do your big turn. I'm gonna put it like right here, and I'm gonna put it a little bit ahead of Minerva, maybe even a little bit ahead of Sacrifice Glass, or maybe top of C. I'm feeling generous today. Next up is Undercover. Undercover got 1 card in set 6, and it's really good. It basically is like the ultimate resource like enabler, because his skill is that when he attacks while boosted, if you have a grade 3 Mordalian Vanguard, you shove both units in that column into Soul, draw a card, and then you can Energy Blast 3 to countercharge 1. So it gives both resources that Undercover struggles with, especially Soul, and you can actually combo it really well with Tigris, because if you boost it with Tigris, you can use the Tigris skill first, bounce it back to your hand, and then use the skill of Genix to shove only him into Soul to draw a card. So it's actually a pretty good card. The only problem is that it doesn't solve the issue where you need to have 3 orders, and you don't really want to play too many copies of Obligator Dragon, the grade 1 double rare that searches an order, because you want more Undercover names to shove into your gauge. So I think in terms of like the support card's really good. I'm gonna put it at like C tier. Again, like C tier is like the standard for me. And maybe I was just too harsh on Koda Blaze. Probably Koda Blaze could be like right here. Because like, man, this deck right here struggles. We're not talking about Lascadia right now, but man. Okay, Sto Raja. Sto Raja is one of the headliners of set 6 in terms of Keter, and in terms of like a fun level, he has massively increased, because I hated this deck, playing this deck before the masks, and now that the mask is actually here, it's super fun. And with the new Dragon Tree Wretch, obviously, it's become a lot more consistent. I think with that being said, the deck's still kind of like alright. Like, there's plenty of decks that do what Sto Raja does, but better, or just like more consistently. Because you need to actually banish a Sto Raja to use the extra drive check effect, and then as soon as you use it 3 times, you're not using that shit ever again. So, in terms of like explosive turn 3, he does have a pretty good turn 3. So I'll put him at like B tier, the same level as like Gandiva, probably a little bit lower since he does lose some of the other decks. I'm gonna put him a little bit below Tam Yuda, and I'm actually gonna move Jet up right here. Next up we have Graham Grace. Graham Grace is in the same like spot to me as Fobniel, where if they gave it actual rearguard support, it would be a lot better. And technically they did, because they gave a promo immediately after making the new form, which is kind of dumb to me, but whatever. And that promo is pretty good. It basically is just a better version of Graham Grace's previous promo that gives triple drive. I'm gonna put it ahead of Fobniel because it is Keter, so it does have access to Keter Pile. And with that, I'm gonna put it ahead of... I'm gonna put it actually in B tier, since giving 2 units a crit is pretty good. And I'm gonna move Lukier a little bit up, since because of explosive turn 3s. It's kind of like what these 2 decks now do. Next up we have Hound Raisers, which is a set 7 deck. In terms of like set 7 decks, like the new decks, it's pretty good, I would argue that it is definitely not C tier because it does have the privilege of spamming Surgown and searching Surgown, and Surgown's obviously a really good card. So yeah, Hound Raiser's got some really cool rear guards. They got some cool stuff, but I just think, unfortunately, I think I'm being really generous giving it B tier. I think realistically they probably should be C tier, but again, the Surgown spam goes a long way. Next up, we're going to be at rank 8. This is Messiah. Messiah got a new stride and a new rear guard like Jet, but unlike Jet, Messiah's rear guard is really good. Lady Battler of the Black Dwarf. She's basically a Combine Rusher for the deck on GP3 onwards, and also is another auto locker. So the deck actually is way more consistent now. And it actually did change a lot. It also has a really better second stride in terms of Transels, because Messiah has a really good matchup not only against like Rezile and Levidros, because they can bind a lot of those really annoying rear guards like Squirrel if they leave that on board, or Foxel, or even Aerial Sage in the case of Rezile, or even Gabuelius. And then obviously once set 7 comes out with Bob Sargra, you're going to be able to bind those Trick Moons and Vilords, which is really good. Or maybe just Trick Moons, because it still chooses a rear guard. But you can bind the Trick Moons that they leave on board, which is pretty nice, along with the Restander. So yeah, I think Messiah, because also how much it draws, is probably one of the better stride deck sets. I'm probably going to put it at like A tier. Probably higher than Led Dilemma, but Led Dilemma is so weird that... No, I'm going to put it higher than Led Dilemma, mostly because fuck that deck. Next up, we have Avangarda. This got one card in set 7, and that card is a common, and it's really good. It basically says that, like, when you put it to soul by Avangarda's effect, it gets one of these two effects. Either if it does not hit, you can search your deck for a copy of itself. I think it's either a copy of yourself or an Avangarda card. I think you can search for either the Persona Rider or the Richter and put it to your hand. Or the other effect is that when you re-ride an Avangarda on top of Avangarda, basically Richter on top of the new one, it gets all the trigger effects and all of your order effects. So once you go into Avangarda Richter, you shove another order into Soul, you swing, then use Avangarda Richter's skill to re-ride into the old Avangarda. It'll still keep all the trigger effects from Richter's drive checks and the order effect. So if you put the plus 5k to your front row every time an Avangarda attacks, it'll still be applied to the Avangarda you re-ride. So because of that, Avangarda got a massive jump up in set 7, and just one card did that, and it's a common, which shows that they could be doing that more, but okay. But that Avangarda is like a B tier deck. I think because of that, Avangarda got so much more consistent. Next up, we got Eva. Speaking of consistency, Eva is also really good in this meta. It probably benefits the most out of the Fire Regulus because it has multiple rear guards like Obscadede that actually care if they're called by a card effect. So being able to not only thin them out, but also call another Obscadede, potentially give it the crit or the front row attack is really good. And it got a really powerful order where when a glitter unit is placed once per turn, you can choose to give that unit 5k, and that actually does stack. So if you have 1 to 2 of these, you can just constantly stack them on the Obscadede, making it like a 33k attack going first. On top of that, like, it has a Migrar, which is a really good promo card, and that order has another effect where you can Soul Blast 1 rested, choose a glitter unit from your drop and put it on the bottom of your deck. So because of that, you can really only play, you can basically reduce the amount of Poison and Paradise you play to just 2 as opposed to 4, because you can just recycle them back into deck or recycle your Obscadedes back into deck. So because of that, Eva, like, I feel like this deck is always going to be really consistent. I feel like Eva just has to go like right here, like maybe right here, because I feel like these decks can kind of clown on Eva because they can just bind their Obscadedes. But yeah, Eva's really good in this format. I think it's a really good deck. Next up, we have Armed Arms. Armed Arms got one card of support. You're going to notice that a lot. I've been saying that a lot. Which is this like wolf guy. It's a double rare. It says when it's placed, you Soul Blast 2. And you can choose an Armed Arms from your drop and put it into your hand. And it gets 5k power. So it's really good to help you like constantly get your arms back. Which honestly this deck already did. But I guess more recovery is always good. And like soul is never really an issue in Armed Arms because there's so many cards that give you soul. Because it also has an effect where you can retire it to grab a Machinery Factories from your deck, or from your drop, not from your deck. And for those of you who don't know what Machine Ring Factory does, you can rest it, look at top 7, choose an Armed Arms and mill it, or if you have one in drop already, you can add that Armed Arms to your hand and put that card into your soul. And it has second effect where you can just put it into your soul to choose 2 Armed Arms from your drop and call them. So it's really good. Like that card basically just helps add a lot of like consistency and like recovery to the deck. But even then, the deck doesn't. It's still a 5 attack deck. It still is like, you know, big power on Vanguard. So if you have like check a front trigger, it's like a 30k buff to your Vanguard, and then if you have the drill, that's an extra crit. So it does like a lot of pretty cool things, but it's still like a C tier deck. I would still put it like right here or right here. Maybe right here. Maybe right here. Next up we have ROV Visor. The only reason why ROV Visor is included right here is because it's getting a promo card, and it's also getting a very interesting card in set 6 that is like an 8k grade 2. It says when it attacks while boosted, you can Energy Blast 3, and then this unit gets your front row. If you have a set order, you have a lock card, your front row gets 5k power for the rest of the turn. So in ROV Visor, it's really good since you can restand that along with the booster that boosts it, swing with it again, then use the skill again in order to give an extra 5k. And on top of the promo coming out pretty soon, you're able to get 3 orders right away, which means you can use your new triple rare to increase your front row by 10k, and you can use ROV Visor to increase your front row by 5k, and then when you restand all of those, they'll all get 5k again. So ROV Visor is looking like it's becoming better and better every set. With that being said, right now it is still a C tier deck, probably even below Virgila. Dayusha. Okay, Dayusha's pretty good. I've always said Dayusha's pretty good since set 3, but I got a new card, which is Die Wing. Die Wing's effect is that when it's placed in Brigade Circle, you can Energy Blast 3 to choose a grade 2 or less, or Dimensional Robo with a different name from it, call it to Brigade Circle, and at end of turn it goes to Soul. You might think that's bad because it's basically just like a more cost for basically doing what the bases do, but there's a couple things that make it better. For one, because its effect calls something from base, or from Soul, you can actually like rest less of your bases and focus more on like energy charging off the base. And then the other thing that's really good about it, and I was talking to Frank about this, like our resident DP player, it's really good because you can call out a rear guard like the Dilander, which gives your Dayusha a crit. Or correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Dilander, or Die Battles, that's the one that gives them a crit. You can call it Dimensional Robo that gives your Vanguard a crit, and then it immediately goes back into your soul. So if you're facing a matchup that retires rear guards, or even like binds it in the case of like Vermilion or Blangmire, it's really good to help protect those rear guards. And Die Wing also has another effect where it gets 5k power if you have a base in the order zone, 5k power, 5k shield, and then if you have 3 or more bases, it gets another 5k power, 5k shield. So on top of like Dayusha, it's a 28k rear guard, 38k on Persona Ride by himself, which is like really strong. We also got Glory Maker, which is the triple rare that so far only works for Dayusha. Basically, when you ride your grade 3 or greater Vanguard, you can call it to Brigade Circle. So it's a maple, and then when it boosts, you can choose one of these effects. You can either make it so for that battle, your opponent has to use 2 or more cards from their hand to guard your Vanguard, or they can't play Blitz orders, which is really good. So if they know that you drove check like a Blitz order, like Elementaria, they can just use Glory Maker. You can't use that for Dayusha's first swing. And if they don't know if you have a Blitz order or not, you can still make it a 2 to guard, which for Dayusha, that's really annoying, especially if they go first right away. Dayusha, I'm probably going to put it in like a high B, because it does really well against Stride deck sets. Because of like its re-ride, this basically doesn't matter if they're going first or second. In Dayusha's case, they probably want to go second. I'm going to put it in like actually, I'm going to be very confident. I'm going to put it at the top of B tier. Because it can also play while at 0, which I feel like a lot of decks really can't do. Dayusha actually can. If it goes first or goes second, right up to grade 3, they can just stay at 0 and do really well. Impaldio. So Impaldio got 1 double rare. Technically got 2 cards, but really only one of the cards is actually good in set 7. It's Radial Arane, which is a card that like if you have 4 more gauges, it gets 5k power and boost. So having a 15k booster is really good for like your Vinsters or even your Vanguard, because it makes them super magic numbers on top of already being super magic numbers. And then end the battle it attacked or boosted, and then if you have 5 more gauges, it pops itself to pop an opponent's rear guard, which like on spot removal retire is really good, especially for a deck that didn't have one. And they had like that promo card that was like a 9k that Soul Blast 2 retire or something, which is like not that great. So it had got that card, and also got the new cycle cards from set 7, the Pride Cyclers, which this deck really appreciates, because not only is it like extra 10k shield you can add to your hand, but it's also a way to clear out your soul on turn 1, so if your opponent crits you, you get 2 gauges right away. So Impaldio got some really good support, and Impaldio is still scary. If you face an Impaldio, it's going to be very rough for you. So I'm going to put Impaldio maybe right here, because it actually does clear its boards. It doesn't really have to worry that much about like Blangmire or Varga. In fact, I might even put it right here just because of its defensive power. Vas Ruger. So Vas Ruger is the new deck in set 7, and honestly, it's like a super budget-friendly deck. And like besides like Bulble Mine, because that'll always be expensive, but besides that, it's a super big beginner-friendly deck, and it kind of like plays itself. But unfortunately, it's not that good right now. Like, it's all right. The only thing it does really is like thin the deck a lot. But even then, it uses a lot of cost. Like the Order uses 3 energy a turn. Visor uses 2 Soul Blasts a turn, and uses a CB every turn on top of the Order using CB and the Triple Rare using CB. And for all that cost, you're only getting a deck that does like 4 attacks, and also only. You're only getting a deck that does 4 attacks with like extra 5k to the front and just like semi-big numbers. But other than that, it doesn't really do anything unfair yet. I don't feel bad about saying that about Vas Ruger right now, because Vas Ruger, obviously, it's going to get better and better. It's an anime deck used by a seemingly important character, and we know from the opening it's going to have 2 more like Phantasmic Beasts or Mythics. So I'm going to put it in C tier, probably the highest C tier I'll give, because I know it has the potential to get even better, maybe even climb up to A or S, depending on how hard they push the deck. Like, if anything, Levydross is a C tier before it got Imperio. Okay, we're almost done. Moving on to Stoicheia, we have Luluu. Very similar to Armed Arms. They got 1 support card, but I would argue its support card is a lot better. It's Metachad. It's a grade 2 that says when it's placed in Rigor Circle, you check top 5 cards of your deck for a Mythiarch card, put into your hand with a different card name, and then if you put a card, you choose a card from your hand, put it into Soul. So it helps fuse Soul, which is really good. It also just helps you thin the deck for like Persona Rides or cards you want to call off Lulu's effect. And then has a really good like guarding skill, where if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Mythiarch in its name, it gets plus 10k shields. It doesn't just get plus 5, it gets plus 10. So it's a 15k shield you can bounce to your hand, or use the promo card to bounce that from drop back into your hand. So adding like consistent 15k shields is definitely like no joke. It still is not like crazy or anything, but the deck has always like drawn quite a few cards. It can afford to go to high damage while also maintaining hand size, and it does have kind of an annoying like utility skill for some decks, because you can like prevent other decks from like standing, or preventing decks like Eva from intercepting with their Obsca Deeds. So because of that, I'm going to put Mythiarch. I'm going to be a little generous, but not that generous. I'm going to put it like right next to Arm. I think these two are around the same level, but I think Mythiarch edges out a little more. Sto Raja. So Sto Raja got actually 3 cards, but technically only 2 of them matter. It got a grade 2 that like whenever it's placed, you can discard a card from your hand to choose a codex, search your deck for a codex card and put it into your hand. So that helps search for more of your orders. And then it got a really good double rare, where it's like end of the battle it boosted. If you played a codex card, you shove it to your soul, draw a card, and then give one of your units 5k, which is like really good. But Sto Raja, unfortunately, there's just so many decks that do like better things in it, which is crazy, because you can literally reduce your opponent's Vanguard's drive, which is like not a lot of decks can do that. Like I'm pretty sure there's no deck in Standard that can do that, but it's just unfortunate because decks like Odium don't care about that, and then decks like just Stride deck sets, so many Stride deck sets, Vanguard Restanders, the deck doesn't draw that many cards. It draws more now because of its recent support, but if I was to be generous here, I actually am feeling kind of generous, I'm going to place it higher than this, probably in the C tier, probably even higher than, probably not higher than Orphis, because if Orphis pops off, it can really do a lot of damage. Next up is Roa. This is like technically the cover card of set 6, and it's just alright. I think the main problem, it's definitely, if you want more consistency with your Vanguard, rather than having to rely on a superior rider, it is technically better, because it does suck when you don't see your like superior rider and you just stay on the OG Roa, And this is technically better, and also is pretty good for like its second effect, being able to bot deck rearguards, because there are some really annoying rearguards in the meta that it's nice for a deck like Roa to have that like potential removal skill. Other than that, the deck really didn't change that much. It's still like kind of a go first, go crazy kind of deck. It also got a new Momoke, which also retires something. So it's more of a control-based Roa. So I'm going to put it right here in B tier. It's alright. Melstrom. Melstrom is a deck I'm super excited for. It's probably going to be my main deck in set 6. And I love all the stuff they've done for Melstrom. They made it such a fun and really powerful deck. I feel confident enough to put this deck. I really want to put this deck in A tier, but I really feel like in set 7 it gets knocked down a little bit. Just because of Vas Ruger, because the retire doesn't really mean a lot against Overlord. I'm going to have to put it. I'm going to put it right. I'm going to put it right here, right in the spot in B tier. I think that's a perfectly fair spot to put him. Next up, we have Argo Sirens. This is the newest ride line set 7 for Sto Raja, and I like it because it's Aqua Force, but it's decent. It does 5 attacks, which not a lot of these like filler decks do right away, and it also has like a Vanguard Restander deck, which I'm pretty sure besides Vivace, besides Leonorn, is the only other Sto Raja like restanding Vanguard, which is pretty good because like it gives you more chance to check your OT or check some front triggers in order to increase your power. And for those of you who don't know how it works, it does it with tiding cards, which are set orders. And the deck's very consistent. Like the set orders search the Argo Sirens, and the Argo Sirens, one of them can search the set order, and one of the set orders can search Tear Dragons, which can draw cards. That includes cards like Stunning Wave, which is its double rare, and Inlet Pulse. So like the deck does do a lot of stuff. The main thing holding this deck back is that it doesn't draw enough cards, which that kind of sucks. And the other thing is that it's one of those decks, and this falls in line with a lot of these decks down here, but especially with this deck, is the deck that needs Persona Ride. I feel like a lot of these decks up here either have something unfair that they do, or have some kind of like scaling, or like increase huge amounts of power for their rearguards, which Argo Sirens really don't. So if you don't see Persona, this deck really falls off super hard. I'm still going to put it in like a relatively high spot. I'm going to put it right next to Undercover. But if you have any like, if you contest any of that, just please let me know. I genuinely do believe with Argo Sirens, if it does not see Persona Ride, the deck falls off so hard, which is why I feel like Undercover kind of edges it out, because if you have 3 orders, you basically have like kind of pseudo Persona Ride. Finally, we have Lyrical. There's only 4 decks that really got upgraded since they weren't in set 6. We have Marlene and oh shit. So I forgot that the trial decks actually did get a double rare in set 7. So Triumph Dragon still stays in D because its double rare doesn't actually give it another attack, and it actually minuses itself to like put the Triumph Dragon into soul, which feels really weird. Just to get like an extra 5k and an energy charge, which is like okay, I guess. Seraph's Isle got better because it does 5 attacks now, so I'll put it in C, low C. Astrum got a lot better because with its promo card in combination with the new double rare, you can mill your orders, your actual set order, and then play them without paying the cost. But I still feel like Seraph's Isle edges it out because it has the Keter pile along with Surdown. Osa Largest draws more cards now, so I'm gonna put it probably above Claudine because it can actually combo off pretty hard with this new double rare and draw even more cards, along with getting 5 attacks. And then we have Christianos, which I feel like is... I am biased because Christianos is one of my favorite decks in DivineZ, but I do feel like it is the better one out of all of them. It still goes in C. I don't think it's D. I don't think any of these are D tier anymore. D tier is like a deck has gotten like really bad support or like no support. Oh, by the way, Eugene probably goes right here. Or goes right here because like it's better now. But Christiano's got a new double rare that shoves a card from your drop or hand into soul, and you shove one from hand, you draw a card. So that allows you to actually use your Severin on turn 3, which is really good, or save that skill so you can use 2 Severins on turn 4, making for 5 attacks. So Cristiano's got a whole lot better in set 7, and I can't wait to test it. Now we're going to go to Marlene. So Marlene got a new double rare that basically does the same thing as the Seraphile one, except it actually gives you soul and draws a card along with, or it doesn't draw a card, correct me if I'm wrong, it shoves something to soul, gives your Vanguard 5k, and then you can call a card from your hand to Rearguard Circle. So it does 5 attacks, which is pretty good, and because Marlene was already one of the better ones. Marlene had like, it was lyrical, so it had a bunch of generics. It had like the Willista ride line going into Sto Raja. So it does a lot of really good stuff. And because the new double rare does Fuel Soul, it probably is the better one, a little bit ahead of Cristiano's. But all of these are around like kind of the same level now, besides Triumph Dragon, which still sucks. Next up we have Chris Rain. Chris Rain got a double rare in set 7 that's like, it's probably one of its worst ones. It basically is like when it's placed on Rearguard Circle, you look at the top card of your deck and you can choose to call it to Rearguard Circle or discard it. And that's really bad because like being able to like, yeah, it could give you like a 5th attack on the Divine Skill turn, but there's already so many cards that do that anyways. But if you see like a trigger, especially like the over trigger, the fact that you have to either call it or discard it makes it a lot worse. Like, yeah, true, you can technically call it and then bounce it off Yuika or Francette, but that's not really justification for what makes this card like that great. If anything, it's like a 1 or 2 of. So with that, Chris Rain doesn't really change. There's already cards that does what it does, but better. So Chris Rain probably goes right here. I think it's definitely better than Undercover and Argo Sirens. Next up is Lichiafail. Lichiafail got basically a Battle Door. It's a double rare that says when it's shoved into Soul by Lichiafail, you counterblast 1, draw a card, and then for the rest of your turn, your Vanguard, or I think it's for the battle. I think it's for the battle, your Vanguard, your opponent has to guard, basically over 2 cards or more, which is pretty good. Lichiafail was already pretty decent. The main thing that made it like kind of bad was that it kind of plays really easily into like Levy Dross, because you have to kind of swing with your rearguards first in order to like get full value off it, and they can draw more cards. And then as soon as Lichiafail does its Divine Skill turn, it kind of falls off very quickly. But it's definitely better than Chris Rain, so I'd probably put it like right here. Definitely above all these decks. It probably stops at like right next to Alcalibra. Alright, now we got a very interesting one. We got Artis Saria. So I already made first thoughts on this deck. It's pretty good. It's like a pretty good deck. Even it's way better than Vas Ruger right now, which is kind of surprising. But yeah, it brings lock into standard, and because of the threat of lock, a lot of these other decks have to like play around it, or their shit's just gonna get locked. And because of like what it does right now, which is just like it pluses a bunch, it bounces stuff back to your hand. It can on turn 4 do consistent 5 attacks while also drawing more cards and locking something. I think it's the lowest spot on A tier. Like I legitimately think this deck is really, really good, and definitely like deserves a spot on A tier with these decks, because besides like these 3 and like obviously Bob Starter, because you can't choose their Vylords, it's like this deck can shut down some other decks. It can really like nerf Leo Odium for one of its turns. It can nerf even a Led Dilemma if they lock their Restander. It can really fuck over Shiranui because they can lock one of their Restanders like a Furai, and that's really good. I think it's just legit, and like, for these decks it really does limit them, because it can lock a lot of their front row rear guards and reduce their turns. So I think Artis Saria is a deck that's really good. It's only going to get better. And then the final deck we're going to go over that's actually important to talk about is Seph Oilla. It's a deck that really got some great upgrades, but with that being said, it still is Dragon Tree. Like it's fun. It's a super fun deck now, and doesn't have to rely on Vartex anymore, and is actually like a deck that doesn't need to be turn 6 in order to do its main gimmick. I think out of all of these Seph Oilla builds, the best one is Dragon Empire, because it's the only one with multi-attack in terms of Espera. And then Keter, because both those nations got the new Dragon Tree Wretches, which can actively search Persona Ride. Because of that, I think Seph Oilla is like at the bottom, the absolute bottom of B tier. I think it's a perfectly fine deck. Because like not discarding for Ride's really good, it energy charges a bunch, so it can use a lot of like energy generics, and also can thin the deck, and it can play its Overtrigger in the main deck. So that's pretty good. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like all of these decks, I'm not going to go over all these decks because for one, like the collab decks, I don't have any idea what those decks do. And for these decks, these have not changed. Maybe I'll talk about the dress-up decks in set 8 because apparently we're getting a double rare that supports dress-up decks. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this tier list. Let me know if you have any debates about where some stuff should be placed. Remember, at the bottom here, like these ones right here, it's kind of hard for me to like judge which decks can beat other decks. But if like, please discuss the tier list, discuss what you think about the format, how it's going to change in set 7, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.